Okay, let's get started. So shalom bracha to everyone. Welcome. Welcome back, I should say. As we do every week, we're going to be focusing on a particular sugya, a particular topic in halacha that relates to this week's sedra, to this week's parsha. And as always, the idea is not only to learn about the halacha, but to learn about what the halacha means to us, and to realize how this halacha is teaching us in the way we serve Hashem, and is teaching us about ourselves as a yid. Now, particularly a week like this week, when the topic in halacha is going to be related to something that's not 100% applicable nowadays, as we will see, nevertheless, the application from Chassidus, the application from the nefesh, the neshama of the halacha, applies at all times in every place. The topic in halacha we're going to be focusing on today is fulfilling a neder, fulfilling an oath. We know when a person takes upon themselves an oath, it's a mitzvah to fulfill it. And it also relates to this week's sedra, as we'll see in a moment. But first, I want to mention that today's shir is based on Likutei Sichos, Chelek Chaf Zayin, volume 27. Now, this week's parsha primarily speaks about the laws of karbanos. Primarily, I see Rabbi Green is joining us.
Stewie, I can't.
You can't hear me?
Stewie, I have no sound.
Okay, but otherwise, Jeff, you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Hello, Rabbi Green. So this week's parsha, Parshas Vayikra, focuses primarily on the dinim of karbanos, the dinim of sacrifices, of sacrificial offerings. Now, although there are many obligatory karbanos that a person must bring, obviously certain times a year, and also if they do something sometimes. But actually, this week's parsha and the book of Vayikra opens up not speaking about those types of karbanos, but rather about a nedava, a neder and nedava. In other words, when a person voluntarily says, I'm going to give a carbon, this sheep that I own is going to be given as a carbon or something like that, that is what we speak about in the beginning of this week's parsha. Now, the Rambam speaks about a situation where a person makes an oath to bring a particular animal as an offering, as a sacrifice, and he doesn't fulfill that commitment 100%. He deviates, he changes a little bit from his commitment. In what way? So we start with, the Rambam brings this case. He says, Hanoider gadol vehevi katan. If a person committed to bring a large carbon, of vehevi katan, instead he brought a smaller carbon, la yatsa. He committed a large, he has to bring a large, he can't bring a small. However, if it was the opposite, katan vehevi gadol, his commitment was to bring a small animal. The Hevi, he delivered, and he delivered more. The Hevi Gadol, he brought a large carbon. Yatsa, he is Yaitza. In other words, he fulfilled his requirement, he fulfilled his obligation to bring the carbon as he said. Now the Rambam clarifies a little bit. He says, Keitzad, in what way does it work? I'm just going to scroll down a little so whoever wants to follow in the English. Amar, if the person said, Hare alai oilo shlamim, I'm going to take it upon myself to bring a carbon oil or carbon shlamim, let's not get into the differences. Keves vehevi ayil. His commitment was to bring a lamb. A lamb is a baby. Vehevi ayil, and he brought a ram, which is a larger animal of that same species, of that same type. Ay or shenadar egel. He vowed to bring as a carbon a calf. Heavy shar. When it came time to fulfill his commitment, he brought an ox. Gedi, he said he would bring a kid, a baby goat. Vehevi seir, and he brought a larger goat. Yatza, he is Yatza. So just want to point out what the Rambam just did, even though it's not going to play such a role in today's shir, is that the Rambam, he said, if you took a small commitment and you bring a larger one, it only works if it's within the same family. In other words, within the same min, within the same type. I just want to clarify that. But either way, the Rambam is saying something very fundamental here. He's saying if you committed to bring a large, you can't bring a small. If you committed to bring a small, you could, in fact, bring a large. That's basically what the Rambam is saying. Where does the Rambam get this from? The Rambam brings it from a Mishnah in Menachos. On the side of the Rambam, you have the Mefarshei Rambam, or they call him the Noisei Kli HaRambam. and the Kesef Mishnah being the leading one, and he many times points to say where the Rambam got this from. And this particular halacha, the Kesef Mishnah says that it comes from this following Mishnah in Maseches Menachos. Almost the same words, but in that case, it's a machlekes. It starts off with the case of Gadol Vehevi Katan, someone committed to bring a large Vehevi Katan, he brought a small animal. Lo Yatza, he did not fulfill his obligation. However, the opposite, the reverse, Katan Vehevi Gadol, if his commitment was to bring small and he brings a large, Yatza, he was Yatza. Rabbi Omer Lo Yatza. Rabbi said he's not Yatza. And the Rambam is basing it from this. In other words, the Rambam is saying the halacha follows the Chachamim versus Rabbi. The Mishnah says Yatza, he is Yotza, and Rabbi disagrees. So the halacha is not like Rabbi who says that it's not Yotza. In other words, if you brought small, if you committed to bring small, you have to bring small. But rather, if someone committed to bring small and they brought large, Yatza, he fulfilled his obligation. What's the opinion of Rabbi? The opinion of Rabbi is actually very obvious. Person takes a commitment. Who cares if you brought a large, it's larger, it's more expensive. More expensive is not the point here. You took upon yourself a commitment. Did you fulfill your commitment? You said you're going to bring a lamb as a carbon, as a sacrifice, as an offering. And you go and you bring an ayil, you bring a ram. Did you fulfill your obligation? Rabbi is saying you didn't. You said lamb and you didn't bring a lamb. Where's the lamb? Chachamim disagree. So now, really, if we want to go straight with the psukim about the fact that a person has to fulfill their commitment and their words, Rabbi's opinion seems to be the more obvious one. As the pasuk says, it's a pasuk in Parashas Kiseitze, but the importance of keeping your word. It says, "Moitzes v'secha tishmar." What comes out of your lips, you must adhere to. You must observe. And you should do. In other words, you should deliver that which you promised and that which you pledged to bring to Hashem as a carbon, which you spoke with your mouth. Seemingly, Rabbi is taking this pasuk and is saying, "Mitzvahs v'secha tishmar." You said words, you have to keep your words. You said it's a lamb. Where's the lamb? And yet, the Chachamim and the Rambam says that the halacha is not so. The halacha is that even if you said you're going to bring a lamb, as long as you bring a lamb or larger, then you are yotze, then you fulfilled your obligation. So what's the explanation? Why does that work? Seemingly you're not keeping your word. So what? You brought more. It's not your word. Your original commitment was a lamb. And again, as I said before, where is the lamb? That was not brought. So Rashi on the Gemara alludes to this, and he writes it like this. Rashi says, the reason why bringing a large is okay, he says, because either way, the nami egel nadar, although he did commit to bring a egel, a calf, nevertheless he brought an ox. Nevertheless, here's the key words that we're going to highlight. Yesh bichlal meruba muat. Included within the larger amount is the smaller amount. Right? There's a famous expression in the Gemara, and interesting to point out, Rashi does not quote this famous expression, slightly different than this, and the expression is Yesh bichlal nosayim mana. Included in 200 is 100. So if somebody comes and says, I promise you, I'm going to give you a donation, okay? I'm going to give you a shul donation, I'm going to give tzedakah, whatever it is, or I'm going to give you a gift, I'm going to give you $100. The next day he comes, he says, here's $200. Did he fulfill his obligation? Absolutely, because included within 200 is 100. So what Rashi seems to imply is that we're going to use that same logic with the animal as well. That included in the larger is the smaller. Now, before I go further on understanding if that's really the reasoning of the Rambam and the reasoning of the Chachamim, or do we have to look deeper into Rashi himself, I just want to take a moment now to explain that this answer that included in the larger is the smaller, there are actually two ways of reading it. I don't want to get caught up with this, but it's a beautiful understanding in Rashi that we see that the Mefarshim, the more recent generations, speak about this. And that is from two different perspectives. Let's first focus on the perspective of the person who took the oath, okay? If you're saying that included in the larger is the smaller, what you're basically saying is like this. You're saying that when a person comes and says, I am committing to bring a lamb as a korban to the Beis Hamikdash. How do you read those words? What he's basically saying is, I'm going to bring at least a lamb. You understand? Why, if he ends up bringing a ram, it's still going to count? It's still going to be fulfilling his obligation because he never committed to bring a lamb. He committed to bring no less than a lamb. That's what he meant to say. That's the way we read his words. That's the way we understand his words. That's one way of understanding the larger is included in the smaller. The more obvious way of reading that statement is simple. No, when he said lamb, he meant lamb. Let's not dig deeper into say he meant no less than a lamb. He meant lamb. That's what he meant. So why does it work if he brings more? Because included in the larger animal, obviously figuratively speaking, included within the larger animal is his smaller commitment, the smaller animal that he committed to. So I just want to, again, it was an analysis in Rashi to point out that when you say that the larger includes the smaller, you have to address it from both ends, from the end of the person who committed and from the end of the animal that's being brought as a korban. Either way, the bottom line of what we're holding as at this point is that the reason why a person comes and he wants to fulfill his commitment and he does something that's not according to his commitment, but he brings more, then it's okay. Then we're going to accept it. Why? Because included in the larger is the smaller. We have a little bit of a problem with this. Because if we analyze the Gemara on this Mishnah, we will see that the Gemara doesn't accept this approach. Because if the Gemara would accept this approach, it wouldn't have gotten into an issue as we're going to see in a moment. So let's put this aside. Again, where are we holding? We're trying to understand the logic, the reasoning, and the defense for the position that if you bring larger, it's okay, even though you're not really fulfilling your word. And so far, what we're holding is that the answer is that in the larger thing that you brought is included the smaller commitment that you made. But let's put that aside and let's move on to something else. And it's going to take a few minutes because we're going to be going through together a Gemara, another Mishnah. There's a lot that we're going to be going through now that will lead us to the question that we have to end up by. There's another Mishnah. It's actually a Mishnah slightly earlier in Maseches Menachos, before the one that we learned before about committing to bring a small, bring a large, committing to bring a large, and bring a small. And it's also a machlokes between Rabbi and the Chachamim. What's this machlokes? It's a situation like this. A person comes to Beis and he says, Pirashti mincha shel asreinim. I committed to bring a korban mincha. Now, korban mincha means it's not davening mincha. Korban mincha is flour, a korban of flour. Now, if a person, the measurements of flour that were brought as a korban is based on a isarin. Isarin means a tenth, but the point is that that's the measurement. So he said, I committed to bring several israinim, a certain, number of tens, and he said of tenths, probably be more correct. The Eini idea kami pirashi, and the guy said, I blanked. I just don't remember. How many tenths did I bring? How many tenths did I commit to bring? I don't know. I said I would bring a certain amount, and I don't know the amount. So what did the Chachamim say? Yavi shishim isarin. You should bring 60 esrainim. 60. Basically, the idea is that the maximum that a person would bring is able to bring as a korban. One korban would be 60 esrainim. So therefore, we take the maximum being 60, and then if you committed to 15, you committed to 20, you committed to 40, it's all included in 60. Rabbi Omer, Rabbi argues. Rabbi disagrees. Rabbi says, no. Yavi minacha shel esroinis me'achad ve'ad shishim. It's going to be a large expense. You don't know how many Yisraelim you committed to. So you know what you have to do? You have to bring a carbon of 1 Yisraelim, a carbon of 2 Yisraelim, a carbon of 3 Yisraelim, a carbon of 4 Yisraelim, a carbon of 5, all the way until 60. What's the math for that, by the way? I don't know. You have 60, then I'm just trying to use in my mind. You do 59, you combine it with the 1, right? You did 58, combine it with the 2, 57, combine it with the 3. Either way, you're probably talking about many Yisraelim. So Chachamim say, just by you don't know how much you committed to bring 60, and whatever amount you brought is there. Rabbi says, no, then you never fulfilled your commitment, because maybe your commitment was not 60, your commitment may have been 15. So you have to bring 1, then you have to bring 2, then you have to bring 3, then you have to bring 4, 5, 6, all the way until 60. That's how many korbanos of mincha you have to bring if you don't remember your commitment of how many. So the Gemara says that truthfully, that machlokes, what are they arguing about? Rabbi and Chachamim, Rav Ashi says, "Bekaten vehevi gadol kumifli." Their argument is in exactly what we were mentioning earlier. It's the same idea, right? If you committed small and you end up bringing a large, an animal, right? Or you committed 15 and you end up bringing 60. Are you yaitz or not? Rabbanan sabri katem ve'vigadol yatsa. The Rabbanan say, yes, you are. The Rebbe savar lo yatsa, because you did not fulfill your obligation and your commitment. So that's what the Gemara did. What the Gemara just now did was to juxtapose, I guess you would say, these two machlokes and say that they're really two sides of the same coin. They're really saying the same thing. So the Gemara asks, if Rabbi and Rabbanan already have another place where they argue about this very topic, there's another Mishnah, the Mishnah that we learned earlier, the Mishnah that we started off with today, the Mishnah that we quoted also in the Rambam, that they're arguing about if he committed to bring small and he brings a large. So then why does Rabbi and Chacham have to argue twice? They argue in the case of someone who commits to bring a small animal and brings a large animal, and also in the case where someone commits to bring a certain amount of flour and doesn't remember how many, could they bring the maximum amount or not? We learned it in a mission that Gadol Yatza Rabbi Emi Lo Yatza. So the Gemara answers, Tzricha. We need both cases. We need both machlokesen, both sources to make this point. Because if the Mishnah would have only taught us that Rebbe and the Rabbanan have this machlokes, have this disagreement in a case of flour, what would have we said? We would have said, we would say that flour and animals are not the same. They're both a carbon, it's true, but they're very much not the same. You see, if a person brings a carbon mincha, a carbon of flour to the Beis Hamikdash, it's not like they poured all the flour on top of the mizbeach. Only a kaimetz is like this. Three fingers that you hold it down, take that amount, like a scoop of flour. That's the amount of flour that would be over here. That's the amount of flour that would be put onto the mizbeach. The rest would be for the kohanim. So no matter how many Yisroinim, no matter how much flour you would donate, the amount that the Mizbeach would get is the same. So you would say that the reason why Rebbe holds that by bringing the larger amount, it includes a smaller amount, is because regardless of how many Yisroinim of flour you originally committed to, the amount that the Mizbeach gets is always the same, so there's really no difference. Abul Hassan, but you would say that in that case, in other words, a case of animals, because nefishi imurim, nefishi imurim means that there's imurim are the parts of the animal that are burnt on the mizbeach. That in the case of a larger animal, the mizbeach sort of is getting more, is gaining more. Ema, you would say moidulei leRebbe. You would say that they agree to Rebbe's opinion that no, you have to stick to your commitment. Because your original commitment. Now what you're giving, you end up giving much more. So you have to stick with your original commitment. And if you would have only written the case of, not the case of flour, the case of animals, what would have you said? You would have said the opposite. Rabbi. Only in that case does Rabbi hold that lo yatsa, because you're putting more onto the mizbeach than your original commitment. But in the case of flour, because your original commitment was to put on the mizbeach one kaimitz, and now again, regardless of how much flour you're giving, it's one kaimitz. Kaimitz again means this scoopful. Ema, you would say maidulul rabbanan, that he agrees to the rabbanan that yatsa, that it was good, that since your original commitment and what you brought now, the mizbeach is getting the same amount. Therefore, tzricha, you need to have the machlokes, both in the case of menachos, of flour, and in the case of animals, to prove the point that Rebbe and Rabbanan argue in both cases. That, by the way, for those who are not familiar, that's a very classical Gemara style reading, right? You start off with a Mishnah. The Gemara then asks, what's the foundation of this Mishnah? They say, oh, there's another Mishnah where the same two people disagree. They say, oh, this is like identical. Then the Gemara says, wait, identical? Why would you have identical? Why do you have to do it twice? You just do it once. One machlekes. So the Gemara then has to say what the advantage of each one is in understanding the positions here. What this really does, what we just learned, puts us in a little bit of a difficult position in terms of understanding the crux and the foundation of the opinion of Rabbanan. Why? Because if the foundation of the opinion of Rabbanan is very straightforward and simple, that in the larger amount, the smaller amount is included, then there would be no difference between flour, no difference between animals. Even if you would bring more of the animal onto the mizbeach, who cares? The logic is that included in the larger amount is the smaller amount. There's no reason to make this distinction between flour and animals. You only make the distinction between flour and animals if there's another rationale here. There's something else here. But if the reasoning was all along that in the larger amount, the smaller amount is included, then the Gemara that we just read is not understandable. So basically, what we're left at is trying to understand what is the reasoning of Rabbanan. That he says that you didn't keep your word. You said lamb and you ended up bringing a ram. You said calf and you ended up bringing an ox. You didn't keep your word, but you're still yaitza. Why? I know that was a long question, sort of drawn out, but in order to understand the background of the Gemara, we had to go into it. But I want to ask a second question, which I know is much more straightforward. And that is, if we're going to understand the way Rashi taught us, which is that the reasoning of Rabbanan, that even though he's not keeping to his word, but he's giving more, he's yaitza, fulfilled his requirement, is because that included in the larger is the smaller, then in that case, it shouldn't just be a b'diavad, it should be a lechatchila, meaning to say, from the words of the Rambam and the words of the Mishnah, it says yatsa. Yatsa means it's not preferable. Preferably, you should keep your word and stick to exactly what you said. You said lamb, bring a lamb. But the words say that it's yatsa. But if you brought a larger one, yatsa, you were yatsa. You fulfilled your requirement. But we wouldn't encourage someone to do so. But if in fact included in the larger is the smaller, then we should encourage people and say, you committed to bring small. I want to encourage you to try to bring a large, because all you're doing is, when you make that commitment, was at least a small, but go and bring a large. From the fact that the way it's written in the Mishnah and the way it's written in the Rambam is what we call b'diavad, if you did it, no, you're yaitza. It should be lechatchila. Someone takes a small commitment, a friend of yours takes a small commitment, you come over to me, you say, by the way, you're able to give more, give more. In other words, it should be lechatchila. We should say someone who takes a small commitment, he's encouraged to bring a larger one. Not just yatsa, he was yaitza. Sort of, if he did it, no, he was yaitza. So that proves to us that there's something else here. The opinion of Rabbanan is not that in your larger amount that you bring is included a smaller commitment. There must be something else here. There must be something else about the original commitment that we have to revisit. And for that, we have to go to the foundation of Nidarim, of an oath. The best place to start with the foundation of Nidarim is obviously in the Torah, but in terms of Halacha, the Rambam has all the laws in the Rambam, but the Rambam also has beautiful titles. The beginning of every Halacha, he starts with in Yiddish you would say a keppel, the title on top. In the title, he tells you what the halachas are going to be about, what the mitzvahs are in these halachas. So in the laws of Nidarim, the Rambam says, Hilchos Nidarim, the laws of oaths. Yesh b'chlon shalosh mitzvahs, there are 3 mitzvahs in these laws. Shtei mitzvah say 2 positive commandments, v'achas mitzvahs leisasa, and 1 prohibition. Zeu pratan, and these are their details. So I want to read the first definition and description of the idea of a neder according to the Rambam. Sheyishmor moitzes svasa v'yasa k'moshe neder. That a person should heed the utterances of his mouth and to carry out his commitment, his vows. Now, I understand that that's basically the words of the Torah. Moitzes v'secha tishmor v'asisa kasher nadartam. However, why does the Rambam have to elaborate and twice? He should say, like he does in all cases when he brings a halacha, he just says, Yasa k'moshe neder, you do as you committed. Instead, the Rambam says, like almost like a poet, Sheyishmar moitzes svasa, he should heed the utterances of his mouth. The Yasa k'moshe neder, and he should do as he committed. That sounds like double language. The Rambam is so precise in his language because it's halacha and every word is teaching us about halacha. Why does the Rambam double it? Heed the utterances of your mouth and carry out k'moshe neder, your commitment. Fulfill your commitment. It seems that the Rambam is teaching us something very fundamental about nidarim, about oaths. That every oath has really 2 elements. In the original oath, when a person takes the oath, there are the words that the person says, the words that the person utters when taking that oath. That's number 1. And number 2 is not his words, but the substance of his words, or the substance of her words. What does it mean, substance of the words? It's almost like kavana, like what the person's sort of kind of thinking about when he says these words. Right now, I'm saying words, right? I'm using words to speak, and everyone is, Baruch Hashem, hearing my words. But you're also thinking, what am I thinking? Sort of, what am I trying to say with my words? Because everything with words has that. There's the words, the very words, sort of the dry words that I'm using, and there's that which I'm conveying through my words. Every time a person takes an oath, those 2 things are happening. They're saying words, but they're also conveying something with their words. They're conveying a commitment. And the Rambam wants us to know that in fulfilling an oath, there's those 2 things. There's the words that the person says and the commitment that they take. Now, we'll see clearly how the Rambam addresses and speaks about these 2 things from another halacha. I want to read one of the halachas after that title, after that koteres, that heading that the Rambam writes. He writes like this: Mitzvah's asher shel Torah, it's a mitzvah, positive mitzvah of the Torah. Shekayim adam shvuasa nidrei, that a person should fulfill his oath and vow, or vow. Bein shehayim indre isur, bein shehayim indre hektish. And then he says there are 2 types of nidarim. There are 2 types of oaths and vows. What are the 2 types? There's nidre isur, a vow of a prohibition, and there's nidre hektish, a vow of sanctification. A vow of a prohibition means that I say, let's say, I am not going to go to that place. Or someone says, I am not going to eat that thing. And he says it with a vow, the lashon of a shvua. So that's a neder iser. You're prohibiting yourself from doing something. A nidre hektish is what we're talking about today. Nidre hektish is when you say this animal is going to the Beis Hamikdash. I'm consecrating this item. I'm donating this to hektish, to holiness. And then the Rambam brings two psukim, and he brings two psukim for the two types of nadarim. He brings shenemar, the pasuk that we were learning up until now, moitzes v'sechet tishma v'asisa kasher nadarta, and again he brings both parts of the pasuk. You should heed the utterances of your mouth and do as you committed, as you vowed. V'nemar, and he brings another pasuk about nidre iser, and listen to what he says. Whatever comes out of your mouth, you should do, you should fulfill. You see the difference? When it comes to the pasuk that speaks of nidre hektish, then there's two things. There is the words and there's the commitment. When it comes to nidre isur, a person prohibiting themselves, there's only the words. It doesn't even say kasher nadarto, or what you committed to. What comes out of your words, comes out of your lips, comes out of your mouth, you have to heed. And what's really at heart here? There's a fundamental difference between someone who takes an oath to prohibit themselves of doing something and someone who takes an oath to make something holy. What's the fundamental difference? The fundamental difference is that when it comes to taking upon ourselves an oath not to do something, that thing is 100% permitted, essentially. It is I who am creating the prohibition. So the only thing you have here is my words. My words are the only thing that you could hold on to create a prohibition. However, in the case of Kedusha, case of holiness, I'm not creating holiness. I'm saying that the holiness that exists should apply to this animal, should sort of be drawn upon this animal, upon this item, upon this object. So when it comes to this fundamental difference you see right here, that when it comes to a neder of isur, me prohibiting myself, the only definition you have to follow the person's words. That's it. You have his words. That's it. That's the only thing that's creating the thing here. However, when it comes to a neder of hektish, which again, let's remember, this is the topic of our discussion, a neder of hektish exists, holiness exists before I came. Hektish is going to exist after me. What I'm doing is I'm applying the hektish, applying the holiness, the sanctification to this item, to this object. And therefore, it's not just my words. It's also the substance of my words, what I'm conveying, what's in my heart when I'm saying these words. You also have to look there. And the Rambam wants us to know that in every oath of a neder of hektish, you have to not only look at the words, but look at the person saying the words. And what's really in their heart at that moment. What are they committing to by saying those words? Don't just take the words dry. And this is really the machlokes between Rabbi and Chachamim. Rabbi says, a person said they're going to bring a lamb. I don't see a lamb. Where's your lamb? You brought a ram, doesn't count. Go back home and bring me a lamb. In other words, we have the person's words, and that's it. We have his words, and the words were not fulfilled. However, the Chachamim say no. You have to look at his heart. When he said a lamb, what was he telling you? He was telling you, I want to bring a carbon to Hashem. That's what I want. If he brings more, of course he brought a carbon to Hashem. Of course he fulfilled that. Don't just take his words dry. Take the substance of his words. Take where the words are coming from, the heart of the words. And his heart is telling you, I want to get close to Hashem. I want to bring a carbon. If he brings a larger carbon, he fulfilled that obligation. He fulfilled that commitment. Because we're not just taking his words, we're taking the substance of the words. That is what Rabbi and Chacham are arguing about. Which, by the way, is so beautiful because Rabbi and Chachamim throughout the Gemara argue in several places precisely about this. And I want to bring one example, a very famous example. It's a Gemara in Brachas. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan. We learned in a Brisa, Kriya Shma Kiksava Divrei Rabbi. Rabbi says that in order to do the mitzvah of reciting Shema, there's only one way. You have to read it in Hebrew, meaning in Lashon HaKodesh, in the words kichsava as it's written in the Torah. The Chachamim disagree, which is actually the halacha. Chachamim say, b'chol lashon. You want to read it in English, you can read it in English. You want to read it in French, in Yiddish, whatever you want, read it in your language. Because what are they arguing about? Rabbi is saying that it's the words that count. It's all about the words. Chachamim is saying it's not the words, it's the substance. When a person says Shema in English, what's the substance here? The substance, it's the same substance as Shema. It's a Kabbalah Somach Shemaim. It's a commitment to Hashem that's being expressed through these words. Don't get caught up on the words that they're English or that they're Yiddish or that they're French, whatever it is. Realize the substance of these words. It's the same substance of the Shema. And when the Torah says to say the words of the Shema, it doesn't mean to say these literal words. It means to have this substance, this commitment of Shema within your heart. That's what Rabbi and Chachamim are arguing about. And what does the Rambam say? The Halacha is like Chachamim. Don't just read a person's words, read their heart when they make a commitment. And this obviously explains the Halacha very clearly. And this explains why the Halacha is like Chachamim. Because like the Rambam sees in many places, that this is the foundation of a neder. The foundation of a neder, of the mitzvah of a neder is, don't just read the words, read the heart. Talk about reading the heart. What's the heart of this halacha? The heart of this halacha, the nefesh of this halacha, the neshama of this halacha is so beautiful. You see, we don't have karbanis nowadays, it's true. But karbanis means karev. We want to get close to Hashem. Bringing a carbon means a person wanting to get close to Hashem. And there are many times that we find ourselves in the position of this halacha, that we are a katan. We commit in small increments. In other words, we take upon ourselves maybe a small increase in fulfilling a mitzvah, in davening, in tzedakah, in study of Torah, and it's small. It really, it might not be major. But this halacha is teaching us that in that small commitment and within that small act that you're doing and that I'm doing, that small act really is a gadol. In other words, within your drive of wanting to do this in order to be a carbon, to be close to Hashem, is really what's really underneath. It's a complete and whole commitment of wanting to get closer to Hashem. That's what is that's what's really at stake, and that's really what's at heart here. So yes, we take small steps. We take small steps, but the small steps are only small expressions of that large commitment, that large attachment that we want to feel, that large closeness that we want to feel. You see, let me explain the connection here. Just like in the halacha, the reason why when a person says small and brings large, it's yatsa. Why is that? Because we're saying that in the original small, don't just read it as small. Read it as a person wanting to get close to Hashem. That's what they want. They said small because they're working slowly. That's the substance of the words. He said small, but those are his words. The substance of the words, you see someone burning flame, wanting to get closer to Hashem. The same thing is with us. It's true that as human beings, we take step at a time. That's the only way we could really deal with ourselves and get closer to Hashem. But what's underneath? What's the drive? It's a fire. It's a fire. It's a passion of wanting to get closer to Hashem, and therefore gadol. It really is. It's part of a greatness of. It's expressing itself in a small way, but a greatness of wanting to get closer and be one with Hashem. So let me summarize what we learned today. We start off with the Rambam that said that someone who committed small and brought large is yatsa, he fulfilled his obligation. We saw that that's a machlokes between Rabbi and Chachamim, and the Rambam is paskening, is saying the halacha is like Chachamim. We asked, the Rabbi is very clear, he's keeping his word. But Chachamim, why is that work? He's not keeping his word. So we went through an answer trying to understand what Rashi was saying. We had different ways of understanding Rashi. The problem with that is that it seemed like from the Gemara that it's not about that the smaller is included in the larger, especially the fact that if that was the case, then it wouldn't just be b'diavad, it would be l'chatchila. We would say, go ahead and bring a larger one. So we said we had to go back to what the original idea of a neder, of a vow is. And we saw that the way the Rambam defines it is in a dual form. He speaks about the words and about the commitment. Because the Rambam wants us to know that in every vow and every oath, there are the words and the substance of the words. And that's really the opinion of Chachamim. Look at the substance. Rabbi, on the other hand, says, no, all we have is the words, look at the words. We see that this machlokes repeats itself in different contexts throughout the Gemara between Rabbi and the Chachamim, through our Mishnayos. We concluded, we said that's really what the reasoning of this halacha is. The reasoning of this halacha is because when we listen to someone say katan and bring a small commitment, what do we hear? What do we hear? If we listen deeper into their words, they're saying small, but they're really saying, I want to get close to Hashem. That's what they're saying. And when they bring the larger animal, of course, they also got closer to Hashem that way. We have their words, and the words is actually, by the way, interesting point. The words is what's limiting it, that it could only be in this category of animals. You can't just go to any animal, not just any large, just because you want to get close to Hashem. You did use words to express yourself, and you're bound by those words. But we don't just take the words. We take the nefesh. We take the substance of those words, sort of the kavanah of those words. And that's how we come to this conclusion to say, if you bring a larger one, you were yotze. Why? Because you were yotze your original commitment. Maybe not your original words, but your original commitment. Based on that, we had a beautiful lesson from this halacha. A lesson about learning about ourselves, that sometimes we take small steps and we should be encouraged to take small steps, but realize that we're not taking small steps, baby steps because we're babies. We're taking baby steps because these are expressions of a larger flame, a larger fire and desire of wanting to be closer to Hashem. So I don't know when we're going to regroup again. Hopefully soon. Hopefully very soon, coming of Mashiach, we should all see each other and learn together and have Yom Tov together. But thank you very much, everybody, for coming together this week and every week. Really, I always looked forward to it. A lot of the preparation was also thanks to the group and also the questions. And Bez Hashem, I look forward very much to coming back together and learning together. And I want to wish everybody a Chag Kosher v'Sameach, Kosher and Freilich and Pesach.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Wish you the very same. All the best.
Amen. Thank you so much.
I have
Thank you.
I
Everything
have
good.
a question/comment.
Yeah, I'm here.
Sure. When you were talking about under the number 10, the different types of vows, and so you said that with prohibitions, it's the focus is more on the words because one is making a prohibition on oneself compared to when one is making a neder hektish. But it seems to me that with a prohibition, if you prohibit yourself from eating something or doing something, the very act of not doing that seems to me to make it more than just words. Like if you grew up, for example, eating treif and you decide now that you're going to keep kosher, so you still have the desire for perhaps for the treif food, but you've obligated yourself that you're only going to eat kosher. So every time you shop or you go somewhere where you see the treif and you decline to buy that or eat that food, that it's part of the prohibition. Yes, you only did it with words, but it's a definite like action or intention, if you will.
Yeah, and I understand. And I want to clarify one thing. What I'm going to say now might sound irrelevant, but obviously, first of all, it's a correction on something that you mentioned, but also it's going to help answer your point or address the point. Number one, a person is not allowed to take a neder on something that the Torah prohibits. So when we're talking about a neder here, we're talking about something the Torah permits, and you're nonetheless saying, I won't do it. You understand what I'm saying? It has to be on something that's permitted. You can't say, I'm not going to eat non-kosher because the Torah already did that for you. In other words, your commitment doesn't add. You can't make a neder amasha kasa b'Torah on something that's already written in the Torah. It has to be in addition to that. But that also answers your point because, therefore, In other words, what I mean to say is the item itself is not prohibited. It is you, and this is to your point, agreeing with you, it is you who maybe is more refined by keeping this commitment, but it's not the item that changes, it's you who changes.
Okay, now I see so your point was that when you consecrate an animal, that's kind of the status of that animal is now changed by becoming hekdesh, but you don't change your status or the item, whatever it is you're not doing. Okay,
Correct.
I was thinking just in terms of the motives and that there are actions that are implicit when you take a prohibition on yourself.
Yeah, I know. I just it was a little important for me to add that point that I just said before about the prohibitions that are in the Torah, permitted in the Torah, because it is for that reason that the Gemara actually says that a person is considered a sinner if they take an oath to prohibit themselves on something that the Torah permitted.
Okay, and also, I guess a follow-up question, and I don't know whether this is the case. I would assume, and please excuse me if I'm making a fool of myself by making the assumption, but I would assume that if you make a vow that something should be consecrated, that is not as easily undone as another vow that you might take on yourself, where you can go to the Beis Din. And
So you're not making a fool of yourself, especially because you're right. But in addition to, and that I think the point you just made strengthens what we said in the class, that because in your case about your own prohibitions, it's your words, that's it we have. When it comes to the case of hekdesh, it's not really your words, it's hekdesh exists, you're just sort of making the shidduch between this animal and hekdesh. I know it sounds funny to say shidduch with an animal, but I mean you're making the connection there, and therefore it's sort of stronger and more binding.
okay, thank you so much. As I wrote you, I've enjoyed all of the shiurim, and I would